Up until a little while ago, my daily driver, my do-it-all device, used to be the iPad Air 2, and today I'm going to review it. Just going over the iPad real quick, you've got a top-mounted power button, you've got your volume buttons on this side, and you've got a nano SIM tray on the right side if you have the cellular model. On the bottom, you've got your dual speakers, no quad speakers, and a lightning connector, not a USB-C port. Nothing on the left side, and also on the top you got a headphone jack. The back you got your camera, and you got your microphone, and you've also got another microphone right there. On the front you've got a home button with Touch ID, and you've got your 1.2 megapixel camera. The rear one is an 8 megapixel camera. Internally, you've got the 6-year-old A8X processor paired with 2 gigs of LPDDR3 RAM and an M8 Motion coprocessor, and you've also got a 7,340 milliamp hour battery. So right here is the spec sheet for the iPad Air 2, and throughout the video we'll be going over each spec. So software. Now, the iPad Air 2 supports the latest version of iPadOS at the time that I'm recording this, which is iPadOS 14.2, and it'll probably end up getting dropped with iPadOS 15, which is probably scheduled to come next September or October. But that totals out to an astonishing 7 years of software support since launch for the iPad Air 2, and that's about as long as a Mac is supported. So just think about that. 7 years on a device like this that was in 2014, $500 to start. So you can't really expect much performance from a 6-year-old tablet. This tablet has the A8X processor, which is a 3-core processor, and it's also paired with 2 gigs of LPDDR3 RAM. Now, it's not groundbreaking, it's not super fast or anything like that, but it'll do fine. And what I mean by fine is it's great for email, web conferencing, web surfing, media consumption, this sort of stuff. But anything that's intensive on the CPU or the GPU, it's not that great at. So an example of this, gaming. I mean, Fortnite is actually supported on this up until Epic Games and Apple sort of clashed, but it could only run it at 30 FPS, all low settings, and it just wasn't really a very good gaming experience when put next to something like a newer iPad or a console or a PC. And the same goes for like video editing, photo editing. When I used to edit stuff like videos on this through iMovie, it would routinely crash, and sometimes, some of my work wouldn't be saved because it would just completely lag me out, and photo editing isn't really the greatest on this either. But as far as basic tasks are concerned, this is just fine. Now on to the thing that you're going to be looking at pretty much all the time that you're going to be using this iPad, the display. So the iPad Air 2 features a 9.7-inch 2048 by 1536 Retina display, and has an aspect ratio of 4:3, and the pixel density is 264 pixels per inch. It gets okay brightness, not that great, 425 nits of max brightness, which is lower than every single other iPad in the lineup that Apple's selling right now. But the thing that this actually does have as an advantage over the base iPad is the laminated display. Now, this laminated display means that there's no gap between the actual glass and the screen, like there is on the iPad 8th gen, 7th gen, and every single base iPad. And that's what gives, when you tap on those, they have this sort of hollow feel, but this, it feels like you're actually touching the screen. However, this display still does not support Apple Pencil, and it will never support Apple Pencil, because the iPad Air 2 came out a year before Apple Pencil 1 was ever released, and Apple didn't make it backwards compatible, so yeah. So the cameras. Now, the iPad Air 2 has an 8 megapixel rear-facing camera that can shoot 1080p 30 video, and a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera that can shoot 720p 60 video. So, were these good in 2014? Well, yes, back in 2014, these were the same cameras as on the iPhone 6, which was the flagship, And these are also the same cameras that are actually on 2020's iPad 8th generation. So back in 2014, this was like, top of the line, best cameras on a tablet probably. It was Apple's most high-end camera that they could offer in an iPad. But in 2020, when we've got 12 megapixel cameras on like the iPad Pro that can shoot 4K, and like 108 megapixel cameras like on the Galaxy S20 Ultra, this is mediocre at best. And so if you're buying this, you're probably not going to want to get them for the cameras. So the microphones. It's got one microphone right next to the camera and another one that's just a bit higher than the volume buttons, which is, well, dual microphones. Now, they don't sound as good as the quad microphones on the iPad Pros, but the iPad Pros are also really the only iPads that have quad microphones. And every other iPad in the lineup has dual microphones. So you're not really missing out on much. I mean, they're fine. You're probably not going to use them to record a podcast or anything, but for like videos and stuff like that, and like class calls or web conferencing, they'll do fine. So just for the record, this is a microphone test for the iPad Air 2 using the front-facing camera. I think it's just alright. It's not the greatest, of course. It's not as good as like the SteelSeries Arctis 3s, which I recently reviewed, or pretty much any other microphone that you can get, like a standalone mic or a headset mic, but it'll get the job done. So another thing that you'll probably be considering when getting this iPad is speakers. So the speakers on this are only dual bottom firing speakers, which aren't as good as the quad speakers on the iPad Pro or the new stereo speakers that are on the iPad Air, but they'll get the job done. And that's really only for stuff like web conferencing or casual media consumption that these are really good for. However, the good thing about this is actually it vibrates the entire iPad when you're using it. And then when you place that on a desk or something, it actually makes the iPad sound louder, which is pretty cool. Thought I should point that out. So here's what I mean. Aside from that, when it comes to something like gaming or just an immersive experience, you've got a headphone jack and you can plug in headphones rather than use these okay speakers on the bottom. So now battery life. Since this is not currently being sold by Apple and hasn't been for the past 3.5 years, your best chances of getting this is used or refurbished. And depending on how much whoever you bought this from has used it, the battery life is going to change. But if it's refurbished, it's probably going to be better. So on my particular unit that I've been using for the past 5 years, I get about 4 hours of battery life. That's 6 hours down from the advertised 10 hours that it had when it first released. And it also takes equally as long to charge because I use the slow 10-watt adapter that came with the iPad. So, is it worth it? Now that is a complicated question to answer because, like I said, since this device is not being sold currently by Apple at the moment, you can find it for various different price points and either used or refurbished. I've seen some for as high as $300 and for as low as $200. So if you're planning on getting these, I have 5 things that I think you're probably going to have to be willing to sacrifice. That is Apple Pencil support, Smart Keyboard support, speakers, performance, and software support. Now these 5 things also probably defer this the most from the iPad 8th gen. But the place that the iPad Air 2 really does shine is that screen. Now that laminated display is like probably the biggest leverage point over every single base iPad that you can get. And you can get refurbished 6th gens, 5th gens that are all used. But that laminated display is just not on any of them, even though they might be cheaper than this. And that laminated display also is just so much better for media consumption and just everything that you do because you feel like you're touching the screen and not glass. It also reduces the latency a bit, which would be nice if this had Apple Pencil support, but it doesn't. So if you're planning on like just using this for web conferencing, web surfing, media consumption, stuff like this, and you don't mind, not having quad speakers, because maybe you use this with headphones all the time, and like you don't mind that it's a bit slower than all the new iPads, and you don't mind that it doesn't have Apple Pencil or Smart Keyboard support, and you don't mind that it's probably going to be dropped, its software support, by next year's iPadOS 15, then all of that, plus finding this for pretty cheap at like maybe $150 to $200, then I'd say you could probably go for it. Because if those 5 things they don't really matter to you, and you just want something that's nice for like web surfing, web conferencing, media consumption, and that's really all that's in the back of your mind when you're getting this, and that's all you really want to do on it, then you can go for it. Because for those things, it does fine. And like I said, that laminated display is just so good. That one main leverage point over every single base iPad. So yeah, hopefully this video helped you make a decision on whether you want to or do not want to get the iPad Air 2 in 2020. But anyways, that's it for me, and thanks so much for watching.